The United States is more divided than ever. Culture wars are raging, Facebook debates are out of control, and civil conversations feel like they're turning into all-out battles. Politicians are playing a dangerous game of one-upmanship, and talk of secession is getting louder. What used to sound absurd is now starting to feel a lot more real for many Americans. What if the South just broke away from the United States? The question feels both familiar and provocative. Historically, the South has been seen as a paradox, a region rich in culture but burdened by high poverty, low education rates, and persistent social struggles. But what if, instead of being an anchor, the South was a rising sail, propelling itself and perhaps dragging the rest of the nation along with it? Defining the South. The South, as defined by the United States government, stretches from the Mason-Dixon line to the Gulf of Mexico. It includes Texas, Florida, Virginia, and even states like Maryland and Delaware, whose southern identity might raise eyebrows. This division, etched into the American psyche during the Civil War, reminds us of the bloody conflict that cost over 620,000 lives. Back then, secession led to unimaginable suffering. But what if that history, long relegated to the past, were to repeat itself in a modern context? In the current political climate, with growing divisions over culture, economics, and governance, secession is no longer an abstract idea. It's a topic that is discussed in hushed tones in state houses, around kitchen tables, and in the halls of Congress. If the South were to secede once again, what would the future hold? As the first shots of this new hypothetical war are fired in heated debates and secessionist movements gain traction, the people of the South look at their region with a sense of both pride and frustration. They see a land rich in resources, oil in Texas, agriculture in Georgia, tech in North Carolina, yet shackled by a federal government they believe no longer represents their values. There's talk of an independent Southern economy, separate from the rest of the United States, one that could flourish with its own trade agreements, tariffs, and policies tailored to regional needs. Would the South once again stand on its own feet? The South's decision to secede would throw both the United States and the Southern states into uncharted waters. On one hand, the South might imagine it could form a powerful new nation, capitalizing on its strengths, energy, agriculture, and manufacturing. Texas, as the largest and wealthiest state, would likely assume a leadership role, with its vast oil reserves and booming tech industry. Florida, with its growing tourism and retired population, would bring both economic and social influence. Together, they might even form a coalition of sorts to rival global powers. But the road to independence is not without its risks. For the South, the challenge lies in establishing a functional government and a unified national identity. It's a region deeply fractured by race, economics, and history, where rural and urban values often clash. Will the Southern elite's vision of a new nation prevail, or will those left behind, those in the impoverished rural heartlands, demand a seat at the table? Meanwhile, the United States would face a crisis of its own. With the South gone, the nation would be drastically smaller, economically weaker, and politically destabilized. Would the U.S. have the resolve to protect its remaining territories, or would this separation mark the end of an empire? The remaining states would have to address a gaping economic hole and a military imbalance that would leave them vulnerable to foreign influence. With trade routes disrupted and a fractured government, the U.S. might find itself at a crossroads, struggling to redefine its place in the world. But not all of the fallout from a secession would be felt in economic terms. Social unrest would surely rise on both sides of the division, particularly among the millions of citizens who, through no choice of their own, would find themselves on the wrong side of the border. Families split between states, mixed-race communities left isolated, and shared cultural values suddenly in conflict would lead to deep tensions. The Southern movement would be confronted by protests from those who do not want to abandon the Union. They would be vocal, persistent, and sometimes violent. Even more critical would be the question of military power. In the 19th century, the North had the industrial might to defeat the South in battle. But today, the military is spread across the entire United States, and losing the South would have profound implications on the nation's ability to defend itself. With southern states home to key military installations, nuclear facilities, and logistics centers, the U.S. would face a considerable gap in its defense capabilities. Would the South build its own military? Would foreign powers seize the opportunity to strike? This uncertainty would lead to tense standoffs along new borders, and a restructuring of military strategy on both sides. As months turn into years, a new equilibrium might emerge. The South, despite the struggles of its early independence, would begin to take shape as a viable nation, one with its own identity and set of policies. It might not be the economic juggernaut that many had hoped for, but with the right alliances, it could become a regional power, stronger, perhaps, than any of its states had been as part of the Union. The U.S., in turn, would struggle to maintain its role as a global leader. The loss of the South's economic output would send shockwaves through international markets. New alliances would need to be formed, especially with the growing influence of China, Russia, and other global powers. But perhaps, over time, the United States would come to focus inward, re-examining its national identity and the purpose of its government. Could a divided nation ever heal, or would the schism be permanent? Ultimately, the vision of a divided America is not one of inevitable war and chaos, but one of a redefined future, where both the U.S. and the South would face a new chapter in history. In this future, both entities would need to rebuild, not just their governments and economies, but their very sense of self. The scars of the past would remain, but there would be a chance for healing, a chance to create something new. The question remains, what would that new future look like, and how would history remember this chapter of division? A region on the rise. In the 21st century, the South has transformed. Its population has surged from 100 million in 2000 to 130 million in 2023. States like Texas and Florida have led this boom, attracting millions with their economic opportunities, growing industries, and appealing climates. Immigrants, entrepreneurs, and families seeking greener pastures have flooded southern cities, making places like Austin, Miami, and Atlanta some of the fastest-growing urban centers in the nation. This migration has brought significant economic benefits. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a staggering $100 billion wealth transfer occurred as people and businesses fled the Northeast and Midwest for the South. The region's GDP has surged, driven by industries like manufacturing, agriculture, and energy. Texas alone produces 41% of the nation's oil and natural gas, and leads in renewable energy production, proving that the South isn't just living in the past, it's actively shaping the future. The economic engine. Industries in the South have flourished. Automotive giants from Asia and Europe set up manufacturing plants, turning the region into a hub of car production. Aerospace companies followed, with ventures like the Aerospace Alliance spanning Louisiana to Florida, creating thousands of jobs. Agriculture remains a cornerstone, with Texas and North Carolina ranking among the top food-producing states. Meanwhile, the energy sector, dominated by oil, gas, and a growing renewable energy market, continues to fuel the region's economic powerhouse. Even sports and entertainment contribute to the South's allure. SEC football isn't just a pastime, it's a cultural phenomenon generating millions in revenue. NASCAR, born from the ingenuity of bootleggers outrunning the law, has become an iconic part of Southern identity, attracting fans and dollars from across the nation, challenges beneath the prosperity. Yet the South's growth isn't without challenges. Despite its economic success, the region struggles with persistent food insecurity. Many residents don't have enough to eat, turning to cheap, unhealthy options. Obesity rates remain high, highlighting the disparity between the South's wealth and the well-being of its people. The bigger picture. If the South were to secede, the consequences for the United States would be profound. The loss of economic powerhouses like Texas and Florida would leave the rest of the nation scrambling to recover lost tax revenue, resources, and industries. Military installations, vital to national security, would vanish from federal control. It's a scenario fraught with uncertainty. But the South isn't just an economic entity. It's a cultural and historical mosaic. Its music, cuisine, and traditions are integral to the American identity. To separate it from the United States would be to sever a vital part of the nation's soul. As the United States grapples with division, the South stands as a testament to both the challenges and possibilities of unity. Whether it remains part of the whole or strikes out on its own, its role in shaping the future of the nation and the world is undeniable. From 2020 to 2022, states in the southern U.S., like Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi, reported levels of food insecurity that far exceeded the national average of 11.2%. Mississippi was the hardest hit, with a staggering rate of about 22%, and the other states were not far behind. The impact of food insecurity goes beyond just a lack of proper nutrition. For many in the South, it means reliance on cheap, unhealthy foods, often fast food, which contributes to a range of health issues. Obesity, diabetes, and chronic illnesses are common among those who struggle with poor nutrition, and the long-term effects can be devastating. But the consequences are not limited to personal health. When individuals suffer from chronic health conditions due to food insecurity, it creates a strain on healthcare systems. Resources that could be used elsewhere are consumed by the rising number of patients needing care for diet-related diseases. As more people become ill and require treatment, hospitals and clinics are overwhelmed, impacting the effectiveness of the entire healthcare system. The effects extend even further. Individuals who are constantly battling health issues are less likely to succeed in their careers or education. Increased absenteeism from work and school not only reduces productivity, but also affects life trajectories. The more people struggle with their health, the harder it becomes for them to be productive members of the workforce or successful entrepreneurs, which ultimately holds back the economy as a whole. A healthy workforce requires proper nutrition, which is the foundation for any thriving society. Just as a Ferrari needs premium fuel to perform at its best, humans need quality food to function well. For those living in the South, the answer to food insecurity lies in improving economic conditions. When people have more disposable income, they can afford healthier food, which in turn reduces medical costs and boosts the economy. While it's still too early to gauge the long-term impact of a revitalized Southern economy, increased wealth could lead to better access to nutritious food for those most at risk. The Southern states, however, are not just struggling with food insecurity. They also play a major role in energy consumption and waste production. While many Southern states use energy at levels on par with the rest of the country, Texas stands out as a leader in both energy production and consumption. About half of Texas's energy consumption comes from the industrial sector, which in turn helps produce more energy. Waste production, on the other hand, is another major issue. Southern states on average produce between 25 to 40 tons of waste per person annually. While this number may seem high, the South is actually doing better than other parts of the country, with some states in the Midwest like Michigan producing up to 66 tons of waste per person. While energy and waste production are key issues, education and culture are also defining features of the South. Unfortunately, the region is still grappling with low literacy rates and high dropout rates, which negatively impact long-term prosperity. Despite some well-known universities in the South, such as Duke and Vanderbilt, the region still struggles to provide adequate education for all its residents. The gap between high-performing institutions and the underperforming public school systems is a glaring issue that needs addressing. Despite the challenges in education, the South excels in cultural contributions. Cities like New Orleans, with its unique food culture, Nashville's vibrant music scene, and the natural beauty of the Appalachian Mountains attract millions of tourists every year. The region's culture, from food to music to the natural environment, helps drive its economy forward and serves as a major part of its identity. The South is also politically unique, with strong ties to the Republican Party and Christianity. This political and religious alignment has given the South significant influence in U.S. politics. In fact, after the 2016 election, most Southern state legislatures came under GOP control, and conservative Christian voters remain a powerful force in the country. The growing population and economic importance of the South have turned it into a key player in the country's future. With more wealth and businesses moving to the region, the Southern states' GDP continues to rise, making them increasingly central to the nation's economic success. Despite all the challenges, from food insecurity to educational disparities, the South is undeniably an essential part of the United States. Its economic power, cultural significance, and political influence ensure that the nation is stronger when united. As the Southern states continue to grow and evolve, the hope is that improvements in economic conditions will lead to better access to nutritious food, improved health outcomes, and stronger educational systems, ensuring a brighter future for the region and the nation as a whole. A nation divided, a future uncertain. The idea of the South seceding is a tantalizing thought experiment, but it raises difficult questions about what such a division would mean. Would the South truly be able to survive on its own, or would the absence of the broader United States prove to be too much of a burden? The Southern states, now thriving economically and boasting a growing population, would likely face a host of challenges. Without the financial backing and federal support from Washington, their economies might initially falter. While the region is home to some of the nation's largest industries, it would need to establish its own trade agreements, military infrastructure, and governing systems. The economic weight carried by industries like oil, agriculture, and manufacturing would be sorely tested without the cushion of federal collaboration. One of the first issues would be the financial void, left by the absence of federal funding. The South contributes a significant portion of national GDP, and a split would deprive the U.S. government of billions in tax revenue. From military bases to major ports, the South hosts assets that are essential to national security and economic prosperity. Their loss would have ripple effects, especially in global markets, where the U.S. plays a key role in energy production, defense, and trade. On the other hand, the South would likely continue to prosper in some ways. With its young, growing population and newfound economic independence, it could become an economic powerhouse in its own right. It already boasts diverse industries, from tech hubs in Texas to manufacturing centers in Alabama, and it's home to some of the most significant agricultural and energy producers in the world. The South's resource-rich land and entrepreneurial spirit could allow it to carve out a place as a global competitor. However, a new Southern nation would also have to contend with internal disparities. While the region's economic growth has been impressive, it still struggles with issues like high poverty rates, educational challenges, and health disparities. The region's infrastructure, healthcare system, and social safety nets would be put to the test in the wake of secession. The wealth gap, too, would likely widen, with affluent areas continuing to thrive, while others, particularly in rural regions, could face increasing hardships. The geopolitical fallout. If the South were to break away, the geopolitical consequences would be felt far beyond U.S. borders. The remaining United States would be left with a significantly reduced territory and resources, making it vulnerable to external forces. The new Southern nation would have to forge alliances quickly, possibly seeking to secure its own standing on the world stage. Countries with a vested interest in American resources, like China, Russia, and the European Union, might try to court the Southern states, further complicating international relations. The U.S., meanwhile, would face a period of introspection and recalibration. The cultural and political divide that spurred the secession attempt would need to be addressed in ways that promote healing and unity. The federal government might need to find ways to reconcile regional differences through policies that address economic inequality, healthcare, education, and climate change. It's not just about maintaining political cohesion. It's about addressing the core issues that have made division seem like a viable option. The military implications would also be profound. With major military installations in the South, the U.S. would face a security dilemma. Losing these key facilities would limit the country's ability to project power globally, especially in the face of rising tensions with other superpowers. The South's departure would lead to a realignment of military strategy, and perhaps a significant weakening of U.S. influence worldwide. The final verdict, a future of possibilities. As we envision the future of both the South and the United States, one thing becomes clear. The question of secession is not just about borders and politics. It's about identity and what kind of nation the U.S. wants to be. If the South were to break away, both entities would face new challenges but also have the chance to redefine themselves. For the South, it could mean embracing its place as a rising economic juggernaut, overcoming internal struggles, to build a more prosperous, self-sufficient future. But this would not come easily, and it would require careful management of resources, investment in education and healthcare, and fostering a cohesive national identity. For the U.S., losing the South would represent a deep wound in its history, one that could take decades to heal. It would force the nation to confront issues of division, cultural, economic, and political, that have simmered for generations. The path to rebuilding a united country would involve addressing the very grievances that led to such a drastic consideration in the first place. In the end, whether the South remains part of the United States or not, both the region and the rest of the nation are at a crossroads. The future is uncertain, but one thing is for sure. The story of the United States is far from over. The next chapters will be written not by divisions, but by the decisions made today that shape tomorrow's America.